Hello, my name is Bill Boysenalt, and on behalf of the Academy of Orthopedic Physical Therapy, I want to welcome you and thank you for helping us celebrate the 50th anniversary of the Academy. 2024 marks the 50th birthday of our organization, our Academy, and the Academy has undertaken a number of activities to highlight, celebrate, honor the first 50 years. And an historical timeline has been developed. And as part of these couch conversations, we have selected certain events that have occurred in the first 50 years, events that not only help shape the Academy, but help shape the profession. And today's topic, we are going to revisit one of the central pillars of the Academy, the Journal of Orthopedic Sports Physical Therapy, affectionately known as JOSPT. Earlier conversation, we interviewed Dr. George Davies, who along with Jim Gould were the original co-editors of the journal. And back in 1979, the first year of the journal, there were approximately 5,000 subscribers. Orthopedic and sports section members made up the constituency. It was published on a quarterly basis, and that was the start. And we fast forward to today, and the journal has approximately 35,000 subscribers that reside in over 60 countries. The journal has official partnerships with 28 international partners, 28 other countries, and additional 6 international alliances. So this push for an international presence really began at the time when our two guests, we're going to fill in some of the behind-the-scenes stories where our two guests were heavily involved in the journal. So how did this journal go from a section-centric publication to a high-impact international journal? So our first guest, Dr. Guy Simoneau. Guy is currently professor at Marquette University in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Guy was technically the 5th editor-in-chief of the journal, serving from 2002 to 2015. Then he returned for about a year and a half, 2018, 2019, to serve as interim editor-in-chief. And again, this was the time frame when the journal really started pushing into the international arena. We also have joining us Dr. Susan Appling. Dr. Appling is clinical professor in the School of Health and Rehabilitation Sciences at The Ohio State University. And Susan has long been involved in the Academy's publication ventures. She was the editor of Orthopedic Practice from 1998 to 2004. And most relevant to today's conversation, Susan served on the JOSPT Board of Directors from 2009 to 2015. So again, overlapped a great deal with Guy's terms as editor-in-chief. So I want to thank you both for taking time to join us today. Before I get to the first question about what was the driving force, the why of moving into the international arena, Guy, I went back and looked at some of your original editorials. First editorial published in January of 2002. I didn't see anything about international publication, international push at all. The goal really, and was a good goal, was promote publication of high quality research. Your next editorial in September of 2002, titled My Perspective, again, the focus really was related to being the journal of choice for MSK, publication of articles related to MSK conditions. So again, I didn't see anything about international push. So the international presence, was that part of your original vision, or did that evolve over time for you?
Well, I think it evolved over time. With the background that being from Canada, I think I was conscious of the international presence all along. But at the time, if I recall correctly, we moved the office from La Crosse to Washington, D.C., so there were a lot of more pressing, urgent kind of matters. And also, we have to put the timeline in perspective, is at the time, we did not do anything online. We didn't have a website presence online. We did all reviews with paper and through the mail. So while it may have been a little bit in my background, there were a lot of things to happen before that could come, at the forefront of things we had goals with. We had many other intermediate goals to put us in a position to to ultimately go at the more international level.
Yeah, a lot of logistical things, behind the scene things that the readership probably wouldn't be aware of. That makes sense. That makes sense. It was in your editorial in December of 2003 where you mentioned about bringing on international reviewers from Canada and Australia, and then fast forward to 2007 when the first partnership formed with Australia. So clearly, either some of the logistical things have been worked through, or was it just you attending international meetings that opened doors for you?
Well, I think that was a long process. I mean, it was, the formulation of the idea was probably somewhere in 2003, 2004. And then simultaneous at the time, we needed to develop the website, also develop our ability to do the review process online. And frankly, it took probably a couple of years to talk to people and slowly providing the idea of, maybe becoming partners with JOSPT. I think, like in many fields, I think people tended to be a little territorial in the fact that, there was some hesitation from partners to bring a product from another country for their membership as opposed to grow their own product. So I think I had to discuss some of those things with a lot of the partners as part of the process.
Yeah.
So it wasn't it wasn't like an overnight acceptance for partners to just want it. It's not like I knock at the door the first time and they said, "Oh yes, great, let's do it." It took a little bit more work than that.
Yeah, persistence, I'm sure. Susan, you joined the board in 2009. So at that point, there were, I think, 3 additional partners, Switzerland, New Zealand, and Ireland. So when you joined the board, they were starting to move a little bit in the international arena. Was that a priority of the board at that time, or was it just kind of seeing how things fleshed out over time?
Well, I think that, as we transitioned away from being run by the boards of directors of each of the sections, the academies, Ortho and Sports, and became an independent board, essentially we became JOSPT Inc. over time, we started looking at how we could expand, how we could get the journal out. And with Guy's leadership around the international component, I think the board saw this as an opportunity to facilitate growth of the journal in a lot of different ways. One, to spread the readership, to really increase the readership. So we were certainly supportive of the international connection. And as a board, we had to decide to invest resources. As Guy mentioned, the internet wasn't really used as effectively in those days in terms of hosting journals, for instance, the online component. And so investing resources in platforms, hiring a new publisher, all those things that we did early on was kind of support this movement to make it possible for us to have those international collaborations, because that online version is really what made it physically a real financial possibility. We're not mailing international, we're not having to do those things, and it made it a good cost benefit ratio, if you will. And so as a board, we were looking at the performance of the journal, impact factor, readership, submissions, although that was certainly in the purview of the editorial board, but also from a board of directors perspective, growing the journal and the business side. And it was also a way for us to create revenue for the journal through subscriptions, because also during this time, libraries at universities were kind of cutting back on, they had restrictions on what journals they could buy and how they could bundle things, how they could do things differently. So we were looking also at the financial component of running the business of the journal. And the international partnerships really provided a great opportunity for us to expand reach, but also to cover our costs and have some additional revenue that wasn't just dues allocations from both of the sections.
Right. Guy, you mentioned kind of the territorial nature and some of the obstacles challenges you had to deal with in the beginning. Was there any hesitancy from within the two sections? I mean, membership, hearing from your editorial board about kind of moving toward these partnerships?
No, I don't think so. I think that everybody was supportive of doing this for a lot of the reason that Susan mentioned there. I think the membership, I never perceive any negative feedback from that. Even when we started growing the editorial board, because as the journal took more recognition internationally, we got more and more submission. We published more papers internationally. So part of that process was also to build an editorial board that was reflective of the international community. And I remember even that being well accepted, that people recognize all the talent we had all over the world, basically, and that bringing that under one umbrella to create this community of researchers and authors as part of the editorial board, but also authorship in the journal. I think people saw that as being very positive.
Yeah, that's a big plus, I would think. Susan, it sounded like most of the board conversations were positive, but was the board hearing any pushback from section members? This is our journal. This should be our section journals. Did you hear that at all?
There were some rumblings, especially early on. I mean, the idea was very appealing to people, but then, as Guy said, the quality of the journal improved, and it wasn't as easy to get your articles published in JOSPT as it had been previously. So the concern was, as well, if we're going to increase our international authors in the journal, how are we going to get published? How are we going to publish articles and research that we've developed? And it's a delicate balance when you're publishing. You want good quality research that's published, and you can't publish everything. And when you have more submissions, I don't know what your percentage jump was, Guy, but I know there was a big jump in submissions for the journal. It makes it hard. And so, there were some rumblings from people, less about folks wanting to support the journal and more from some authors who are concerned they weren't going to be able to publish their work. So, there were other ideas that have come up since then, different ways. Orthopedic Practice started publishing some, they had done case studies in the past and some other things, but it's not the quality, it's not a journal like JOSPT is. So there were alternatives that came around, and some other journals have come up since then. But I think overall people were really excited about the idea and very supportive about the idea of JOSPT moving to an international journal.
Guy, as the number of international partners jumped, I mean, I know you attended a number of international conferences and meeting people and mingling people and representing the journal. I mean, was that the primary way of recruiting these international partners, or was it word by mouth advertising that brought people to you?
Probably the primary way we approach partners was through the listing of the members of the International Federation of Sports Physical Therapy and the International Federation of Manual Physical Therapy. The list of countries that had membership there, I would basically send them an email. I would find out who the leadership was, send them emails, and offer them the idea. And at the time, pretty sure that none of those people knew who I was, but hopefully they knew what JOSPT was, and it was a slow process of contacting and then sometimes receiving return emails, but I think our presence also at international conferences, having a booth there, was critically important. So that's something we prioritized to be visible, and I think also. The transformation to me that occurred at these conferences, which was pretty remarkable, is, you used to go to those conferences and maybe you hear one author mention JOSPT once as one of the articles cited in their presentation, to all of a sudden, like practically every author having a reference to JOSPT article in their presentation. I think that's probably the best publicity we ever had, is how much JOSPT became cited in those presentations. So again, it was all kind of different ways, but mostly contacting people through email and meeting them at conferences, stopping by some people would stop at the booth and make contact with whoever was at the booth. So it was a slow but steady process that was kind of really rewarding to see grow over time, actually.
Yes, yeah, I'm sure in many, many ways. Yes, Susan.
I was just going to say, and again, from that board side, I remember we would have conversations at our board meetings. Gam, I'm not sure if you remember this or not, but we'd always look about, what's the cost benefit of attending of Guy and often Edie attending these meetings. And every time, Guy would report, it just seemed so, it was such a good idea. It was worth it. It was definitely worth the investment. And again, while it was slow, it continued to grow and continued to grow.
Yeah. If I remember right, at these conferences, international conferences, you had boxes of issues of the journal,
Yeah.
hard copy, but people love to pick up things as they walk through the exhibit area.
Yeah, and I think we were maybe the first independent journal to go to those conferences. You had the Elsevier, you had all the big companies, and then after a few years, you realize that now there's other independent journals going to those conferences. So I think we provided a little bit of impetus for those independent journals, which I think are important. I mean, it's important to have those independent publications that are not under those big umbrellas. It certainly for us gave us flexibility to change the look of the journal, the content, and all of those kind of things. So I hope JOSPT remains that independent structure for a very long time, because I think it's an important feature of the journal.
Yeah.
And I would say, Bill, just to mention now, the stories related to those meetings and all, I think it's important to highlight really what a trailblazer that Guy has been in terms of his leadership with the journal at these conferences. Because, not all editors-in-chief would be doing this, right? But he was present at these meetings and really just a trailblazer in establishing this idea of an international journal for MSK in particular. There were none, right? Yeah. In the same fashion, and so that it covered all of really musculoskeletal, orthopedic, and sports. So I do want to make sure we recognize what a trailblazer Guy has been with regard to the journal.
With this, when we think about, all the obvious positives that have occurred along with this international push, Guy, there had to have been some challenges, whether related to the partners themselves or reviewing, manuscripts submitted by international authors. It couldn't have all been easy from just that regard.
Mm-hmm. I think that the administrative part in the office, I know that people working in the office work really hard in creating those mailing lists, not mailing lists sending paper, but the email contacts of all the members of the various organizations. So there was a lot of background work to be done there. And from the perspective of the journal, definitely the challenge was the growth of, we went from reviewing 100 papers a year to in the excess of nearly 1,000 papers a year. So that brought some changes that needed to occur as well, like many journal. I think people initially with JOSPT always appreciated we did a thorough review. I would send comments, so spend a lot of time with those 100 papers in many ways. And then when you have 1,000, to say, okay, I already spent all my time with 100. So basically, some of the harder things were the idea that a lot of people took journals as being the role of editors as being educational, tell us what we did wrong, and all of those, give us comments. And in today's world, it's becoming more difficult to do that. So it became like, okay, I need to triage some of those papers that I just say thank you, but it's not as much of interest, or it's not as much in terms of impact, without providing any more additional. So that's probably where it was the most difficult, at least for me, because I always look at my role providing feedback, and all of a sudden I have to just kind of send a very little form letter that says lack of impact or lack of interest, and that, people don't realize that at your end as the editor, it doesn't make me happy to do that. I didn't do that because, that I didn't go home be happy to do it. I was kind of disappointed that I couldn't participate more. But eventually, it's struggling. But from an international perspective too, I think, and it's talked about now, is also, I think what I tried to do that's different. And English is my second language, so I could really relate to people who are writing manuscripts in a second language. So I spent a lot of time promoting and not rejecting paper just on language issue, but trying to really help with those manuscripts that were good, that maybe needed more word polishing from a language perspective. And that, I think, was also kind of a novel idea, that because a lot of papers get rejected just on the language. So and again, that has to do with my background. English is my second language, and even today, even if I've been here so many years, my writing is not necessarily as good as I like it to be. So that's so those were the places, the challenges, but also I think where we did things a little bit different. And I know that a lot of authors from around the world appreciated getting the help as opposed to the quick rejection of, get somebody to write a paper for you.
Right. Yeah, I have to believe that your Canadian background, English being your second language, must have given you some credibility when you were meeting with some of these international practitioners and educators, as a representative of this U.S. based journal. So I would like to think that it probably opened some doors for you.
Well, I think that's true too. This is why I did all the contacting and not the people in the office and not the editorial board, because I presented to them very clearly that we made a fairly limited revenue from those things. It was never going to support the journal, and it was basically just to cover some added expenses of maintaining the list and all that. But it wasn't like this was going to make us rich. So, and as the editor, I could present that to them in a very simple way. My interest is, you have all these groups around the world that are sports, ortho, manual therapy groups that are too small to create their own journal, their own publications. And all of your members probably should benefit from what we're doing. And we're willing to share that information. In fact, we have a lot of authors from your country, and we want to basically return that information to your country. They want to publish with us, and it's kind of feel bad to have that information and not share it back. So this was kind of the motivation, and say, the financial aspect is really tertiary and much further down the road, at least for me.
Yeah.
And I think that came out in a better way, coming from the editor and then a business person trying to get those membership going, and just value the information sharing as opposed to the financial aspects of it.
Right. Susan, from you're wearing your JOSPT board hat, do you believe the original goals, have they been met? Has this been overall really a positive move for the journal going in this direction? And then also answering from your perspective as an educator and a clinician.
Yeah. I would say with that board hat that yes, I think where the journal is today with the international partnerships is, I don't know if it's easy to, more than we imagined. I think it's more than we imagined at the time when we were getting this started, because early on we were JSPT was really the only journal out there really building that international presence. And then more folks came in and kind of joined the party and wanted to increase their collaborations internationally, both as a member benefit versus a discounted access. So from that perspective, we were the first, but in the end, I think we've grown. GSPT really has grown more than any of the other players in the market in terms of an international element or international journal. So I think that really exceeded our expectations from that perspective. As an educator and clinician, I would say certainly JOSPT is, we all see it as the top journal in MSK. So, as an educator in that space, right, it's the first thing you go to. It's the articles you use in your classroom. And access to that is so important. So, that international flavor, I think, also helps not just all of our students, but especially some of our international students that we have. They can see themselves in these publications, and there's opportunity for folks in seeing that this really is a journal that they could potentially publish in if that's the direction that they move in their career. So I think it teaches all of us on many different levels, not just the clinical content, right, the research and clinical content, but also that ability to see yourself as an author And I think that's really important, especially in this day and age. But I think that's really important.
Yeah, I can see that being huge. Guy, in hindsight, looking back, anything you would have done differently if you had a do-over along the way with this process?
I try not to look at it that way. No, I think I think the reality is I never had in my mind the end zone. Basically, I never saw the end product. It was something that I tried to promote and tried to grow. And the reality is, in my mind, even if I drove the process initially, it exceeded everything I ever thought it would.
Yeah.
Just look at the journal. I think we were, as impact factor, within a few years, we were always number 1 or 2 impact factor within the PT world. Top 10% in orthopedics and rehabilitation and in sports science as a journal. All of those clearly went beyond. I had this idea, but nobody, and I think it grew to the point where it became kind of like matter of fact. But in fact, looking back, it was a pretty significant change. I remember still looking at, access to the GSPT website online, and initially it was a few thousand a month. And by the time I retired the first time from the journal, we had over 1 million visits every month to the journal. And in going to international meeting, people talking about the journal like it was something very important to them. Things different. I don't think so. Could I have expected how it grew? Maybe not. But we have also to understand that maybe that lack of expectations also that at the time we didn't really know how the internet was going to change everybody's lives.
Right.
So in many ways, I think if we look at all aspects of professional lives today, everybody should be thinking that everything we're doing online is expecting or expectations of is beyond our expectation of 2002 or 3 when these things did not exist.
Yeah.
Well, the development in the technology we probably needs a little bit of the credit for everything that was able to do, because without it, it would not have been what it is.
Right. Certainly not at the speed that things happened.
Yeah.
Right.
Susan, from a board perspective, I guess maybe I should phrase this differently. Any lessons learned looking back at board discussions, board decisions regarding this international push?
Well, I think we tried to be kind of sensitive to the needs of the needs of both orthopedic and sports academy members, and kind of go from our origin to really be attentive to the needs of that, with always looking at that potential for growth. And again, when the journal became separate from the 2 sections, I think that really opened the possibility to have some freedom to look at how things could go differently. And I think he is right. I remember one of the current concerns we had early on was, as we were expanding the editorial board, it's like, we got to financially support this because they all meet in person, at least once a year. And when you have international members, that's an increased cost. And how do you do all these things? And, we learned through COVID, if not before, that there's a lot that can happen, just like what we're doing right now. There's a lot that can happen with use of technology. And I think that, as Guy said, I think that really facilitated where we are now in a time frame that was unanticipated. But the lessons learned, I think, to be open to opportunities and to recognize individual gifts that people bring, because again, not every editor had the same kind of background that Guy had, and because of Guy's unique background,
Right.
It just was the right time, right place, right moment, and I think that really made it possible for us to be where we are today.
Yeah.
So you got to trust who you have.
Yeah.
You got to trust who you have. You got to have the right person at the right time and the right people, not just one person, but the right people. But and that sometimes you just got to trust your gut, right?
Yes, very much so. Guy, any final thoughts from your perspective? Any behind the scene things that people would never know that help move the needle?
Well, I think that JOSPT is the product of many people. I mean, I'm sitting here now, but at the end of the day, I was just a little cog in a very big wheel. And you look at all the international partners that gave us credibility and believed in the value of the journal for their membership. All the editorial board members that contributed to the journal. That's pretty incredible. All the authors that um, were told to change this and change that again and change this again, another version, and that made the journal that improved the quality. And then the unsung heroes obviously have been, or not, maybe not so obviously, have been people in the office. Edie Holmes, her background was interesting, and it was a perfect match with my ideas. Was that she came from not a research publication background; she came from popular publication journal background. So her idea of to her there was nothing abnormal to expanding the journal to new leaderships and all of those things. And she believed in. If you look at the journal, also the appearance of the journal. She's the one really that promoted the fact that scientific journals, they look awful. I mean, they just have poor choice in font, poor choice in spacings, poor choice in everything in terms of figures and all that. If you look at the journal, also JOSPT, and I think that's forgotten as well, but still today, it's probably the best looking journal you have compared to very unattractive scientific literature that publication don't want to spend money on how it looks.
Right.
And there's value to that. There's value to having font that can read easily. Nobody realizes those things, but subconsciously it does make a difference. So there's a lot of people. I always said that I'm just a very small part of that equation there, and basically so many people to be thankful for. So for me, it was just a privilege, and I'm just happy that the journal grew, and it was just a very fun ride, basically.
Yeah, and that's a really good combination, and having fun along the way. Um, well, thank you both very much for making time today and all your contributions in the past, as well as what you're currently doing for the profession. As you know, JOSPT is celebrating its 45th anniversary this year, so it's number 50 for the academy, but 45 for the journal. And when you look back to where it began, kind of merging of newsletters from ortho and sports sections, roughly 5,000 subscribers, and George Davies and Jim Gould and families would get together, put labels on each of the journals, and mail all 5,000 every quarter, to the way things are done today. It's really an amazing journey, and I agree with you wholeheartedly. The bringing on of international partners, reviewers, board members, submitters of manuscripts, has really strengthened our science and positioned us to meet the challenges that our profession is facing today. So, on behalf of all the members, thank you both for all you have done and are doing on behalf of the profession.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you, Bill.
Okay.